There is a strange moment in every soul's journey when heaven interrupts the noise of the world and speaks directly to the heart. You did not arrive at this message by accident, nor by some careless movement of the hand. God has a way of stopping a wandering spirit before it falls too far into darkness. What you are about to hear may unsettle you, because truth often arrives like thunder before the rain. The scroll was blocked for a reason, chosen one, and the reason cannot wait another second. There are moments in life when a man believes he is making his own choices, while in truth he is merely drifting with the current of noise, appetite, and distraction. The modern soul has become skilled at movement but terribly unfamiliar with meaning. One scroll leads to another, one voice drowns out the next, and before long a person forgets that silence itself can be sacred. Yet God, in his severe mercy, sometimes interrupts the wandering hand before the wandering heart destroys itself completely. You believed you were merely passing time, but heaven saw something far more dangerous approaching your spirit. The enemy rarely arrives clothed in obvious evil. That is the childish imagination. End of darkness. Evil is far more patient than that. It enters quietly through exhaustion, through endless entertainment, through the gradual deadening of conviction. A soul is not usually stolen in one violent moment. It is surrendered inch by inch, appetite by appetite, compromise by compromise. The tragedy is that many never notice the theft taking place. They laugh while losing the very sensitivity that once made them tremble before truth. They smile while their inner life grows hollow. They continue scrolling because stillness would force them to confront what they have become. But God saw the direction of your thoughts before you saw it yourself. He saw the weariness hidden behind your habits. He saw the confusion you disguised as confidence. He saw the secret temptation to stop caring altogether. And before the enemy could place another chain upon your mind, God interrupted the pattern. You call it coincidence because that is the easiest word available to a modern generation uncomfortable with divine involvement. Yet coincidence cannot explain why certain words pierce directly into the places you keep hidden from the world. The frightening thing about distraction is not mere, like that it wastes time. It reshapes desire. A distracted man eventually loses the ability to recognize what is eternal because his attention has been trained only upon what is immediate. He becomes restless in the presence of truth and comfortable in the presence of noise. The enemy understands this perfectly. Satan does not always destroy a calling through catastrophe. Often he destroys it through triviality. He fills a life with so much meaningless motion that the soul no longer has strength left to seek God with sincerity. And perhaps that is why this interruption feels uncomfortable to you. Deep within yourself, you know something sacred is pressing against the walls you built around your conscience. You have sensed for some time that your spirit has been starving while your flesh remained endlessly entertained. There were nights when you felt an emptiness no distraction could cure. Moments when laughter sounded artificial even to your own ears. Times when you reached for another source of comfort because you feared what truth might demand from you if you sat quietly long enough to hear it. God blocked your scroll because your mind was approaching a dangerous edge. Not necessary, arrogantly an outward collapse visible to others, but an inward surrender where conviction slowly dies. There is a terrible condition in which a man continues functioning outwardly, while inwardly becoming numb to goodness, numb to wonder, numb to God himself. That numbness is more dangerous than pain because pain at least reminds a soul it is still alive. You have underestimated how fiercely heaven has protected you. There were influences that almost captured your thinking completely. There were lies that nearly became your identity. There were voices attempting to convince you that compromise was maturity, that cynicism was wisdom, and that spiritual hunger was weakness. Yet God would not allow your story to end in that darkness. He stepped into your distraction because your calling is too important to abandon to the appetite of a wandering. Mind the reason the past few years have felt so confusing is because you mistook preparation for abandonment. You interpreted delay as rejection, silence as absence, and isolation as failure. Yet the tragedy of the human soul is that it judges heaven by immediate comfort rather than eternal purpose. We are impatient creatures. We desire explanation. End before obedience, reward before endurance, arrival before transformation. But God has never been primarily concerned with making a man comfortable. He is concerned with making him ready. And readiness is often born in places the world would call unbearable. There are truths that can only be learned in loneliness. There are dimensions of faith that cannot survive in crowds because crowds make it too easy to borrow conviction from others. God sometimes removes applause so a soul may finally discover whether it truly believes. He strips away the noise, the recognition, the constant reassurance, until a person stands face to face with themselves in dreadful honesty. Most flee from that moment. Very few endure it long enough to become transformed by it. You wondered why certain relationships dissolved without warning. You questioned why doors closed after you prayed so desperately for them to remain open. You watched opportunities disappear, watched people misunderstand you, watched support vanish at the very moment you believed you needed it most. And because human vision is painfully limited, you assumed heaven had turned against you. Yet it was precisely the opposite. God was PR, preventing you from building your future upon foundations too weak to carry your calling. A man chosen for greater purpose cannot remain dependent upon shallow approval. If he does, every criticism will shatter him, and every rejection will tempt him toward bitterness. So God permits seasons where the chosen one feels hidden, forgotten, even discarded. Not because he lacks value, but because value must be refined before it can bear weight. Iron placed into fire may imagine itself destroyed, while the blacksmith knows it is merely becoming stronger. The modern world worships visibility. It teaches people to measure significance by attention, influence, and constant validation. Yet some of the holiest work God performs happens in obscurity, where no audience applauds and no earthly reward appears. Moses wandered deserts long before leading nations. David was isolated among sheep before wearing a crown. Even Christ himself entered the wilderness before stepping publicly into purpose. Heaven has always prepared its servants away from the noise of shallow admiration. And perhaps that explains why your isolation felt strangely sacred even while it wounded you. There were moments when lone, Linus uncovered truths you had ignored for years. You began seeing people more clearly. You noticed how often affection was conditional. You discovered how fragile human loyalty becomes when convenience disappears. Painful as it was, the separation revealed which voices genuinely carried wisdom and which merely carried distraction. God was teaching you not to lean so heavily upon the temporary, because anything that can be removed from your life was never meant to become your foundation. Careers shift, people change, seasons end. Human praise rises and falls like waves against stone. But the soul anchored in God develops a stability the world cannot understand. Such a soul may bend beneath suffering, but it does not ultimately break. There is also another reason for your delay that you have not fully considered. Certain blessings arrive too early and become curses instead. A platform given before character matures produces arrogance. Influence without wisdom destroys both the leader and those who follow him. Power without discipline exposes the darkness hidden within the human heart. God delays not because he delights in withholding, but because mercy sometimes says not yet when. An impatient screams for immediate fulfillment. The enemy tried to convince you that your hidden season proved you are insignificant. But obscurity is often the training ground of destiny. Roots grow deepest where nobody can see them. And a tree without deep roots cannot survive violent storms. God knew the storms attached to your future assignment long before you encountered them. He knew the betrayals, temptations, pressures, and spiritual battles waiting ahead. So he allowed isolation to develop endurance inside you before elevation ever arrived. There were nights when you believed you had been left behind while others moved ahead, effortlessly. You compared your waiting to their progress and quietly wondered whether God had forgotten your name. Yet comparison is one of the enemy's oldest weapons because it blinds a person to the uniqueness of their own calling. Some are permitted easier roads because their assignments require less weight, but those entrusted with greater spiritual responsibility are often shaped through deeper breaking. And breaking is never pleasant to the flesh. It wounds pride. It destroys illusion. It forces a soul to admit how little control it truly possesses. But hidden inside that breaking is the beginning of wisdom, because only the humble heart can fully receive what heaven desires to place within it. By the time a person begins to recognize the spiritual nature of their struggle, they are often already exhausted from fighting battles they could not properly name. You sensed pressure around your life long before you understood its source. There were seasons when everything appeared normal outwardly, yet inwardly you felt constantly under attack. Your peace became difficult to hold on to. Your thoughts turned heavy without warning. Fear arrived suddenly in moments that should have been calm. And because modern minds have been trained to explain away every invisible reality, you tried to convince yourself it was merely stress, coincidence, or overthinking. But there are battles that exist beyond the reach of ordinary language. The greatest trick of darkness is persuading people that spiritual warfare belongs only to superstition, while it quietly shapes their desires, weakens their convictions, and drains their sense of purpose. The enemy does not always attack through catastrophe. Sometimes he attacks through weariness. He surrounds a soul with enough confusion, temptation, and disappointment that the person gradually loses the will to resist at all. A tired spirit becomes vulnerable to lies it would have rejected in seasons of strength, and you have been far more resilient than you realize. There were moments when you nearly surrendered completely. Moments when bitterness tempted you because kindness seemed to bring only pain. Moments when compromise appeared easier than obedience. The frightening thing is that few people around you recognize the intensity of what you are carrying. Human beings often notice visible wounds while remaining blind to invisible wars. They saw your silence but not the storm behind it. They observed your distance without understanding the burden crushing your thoughts each night. Yet despite everything that came against you, something within refused to die. That is not weakness. That is evidence. You have mistaken survival for insignificance, when in truth survival itself reveals the presence of strength heaven placed inside you long ago. A lesser spirit would have collapsed beneath the weight you carried. Some people are destroyed by one betrayal, one disappointment, one season of isolation. Yet you endured repeated attacks against your confidence, your peace, your identity, and still there remains within you a restless desire for truth that refuses to disappear. The enemy noticed your calling long before you fully understood it yourself. Darkness studies potential carefully. Satan fears people who awaken spiritually because awakened souls become dangerous to deception. A person who truly understands their identity in God cannot easily be manipulated by fear, distraction, or shallow approval. So the attacks often begin early. Confusion enters childhood. Rejection appears repeatedly. Unusual struggles follow the person through different seasons of life. The chosen one frequently grows up feeling different without understanding why. You thought your sensitivity was a flaw. You believed your deep thinking made you weak. You wondered why ordinary distractions never fully satisfied you the way they seemed to satisfy others. But perhaps the discomfort you carried was not dysfunction at all. Perhaps your spirit recognized that it was created for something beyond the empty patterns this world celebrates. There is a reason you feel exhausted around certain people and strangely strengthened around truth. There is a reason some environments drain your spirit while moments of prayer, reflection, or sincerity awaken something alive inside you again. The soul was not designed merely to consume entertainment and survive another day. It was created for communion with God. And when that communion is neglected, even success begins to feel strangely hollow. Still, you underestimate the authority God has already planted within you. You keep waiting to become stronger while ignoring the evidence of strength already present in your endurance. Strength is not merely loud confidence or fearless emotion. Often true strength appears as persistence in the middle of fear. It is the decision to continue seeking light while surrounded by darkness. It is the refusal to let cynicism completely poison the heart after repeated disappointment. It is continuing to believe there must be meaning beyond suffering even when life offers no immediate explanation. The enemy wanted your struggles to convince you that you were abandoned. God intended those same struggles to reveal the durability of your spirit. There is also a painful loneliness attached to spiritual battles because not everyone can perceive them. Some people will misunderstand your caution and call it distance. Others will mock your convictions because they cannot comprehend the invisible weight behind them. The world often celebrates people who numb themselves while quietly ridiculing those who remain spiritually alert. But discernment carries a cost. Once a soul begins recognizing truth more clearly, it can no longer comfortably participate in certain illusions. And that realization changes everything. You begin noticing manipulation where you once saw harmless entertainment. You begin sensing emptiness beneath conversations that once seemed meaningful. You become aware that many people are spiritually asleep while believing themselves fully awake. This awareness can feel isolating, but isolation is sometimes the birthplace of discernment. God pulls certain people away from constant noise so they can finally hear His voice above the confusion of the world. The battle around your life intensified because your awakening threatened darkness. Not because you are perfect, but because a person moving toward truth becomes difficult to control. The enemy prefers distractor, acted souls, addicted souls, endlessly entertained souls, people too spiritually numb to question where their lives are actually heading. But heaven would not allow you to remain asleep forever, and that is why the struggle around your mind became so fierce. There is a painful discovery every chosen soul must eventually face. Not every voice surrounding you was sent to help you become who God called you to be. Some were assigned to delay you. Others were present merely to confuse you. And a few, though smiling outwardly, felt deeply unsettled by the possibility of what you might become if you ever fully believed in the calling placed upon your life. Human beings are often comfortable with weakness because weakness makes others feel safe. A person without conviction can be controlled, predicted, and quietly ignored. But the moment someone begins awakening to divine purpose, resistance suddenly appears from unexpected places. The tragedy is that this resistance rarely arrives openly. It hides itself behind criticism disguised as advice, doubt disguised as realism, and mockery disguised as humor. You have heard these voices before. Who do you think you are? You are imagining the ings. You should lower your expectations. Be realistic. Stop thinking so deeply. Just live like everyone else. Such words may appear harmless to the careless observer, yet repeated often enough they begin shaping the architecture of the mind. The enemy understands the destructive power of repeated doubt. A man convinced he is small will eventually shrink himself without needing chains. He will silence his own gifts before the world ever has to oppose them directly. And perhaps that has been one of your greatest battles. You carried something within you that others could sense even before you could explain it yourself. There was a depth to your spirit that unsettled shallow environments. You asked questions others avoided. You felt conviction where others felt comfort. You sensed that life must contain more than endless distraction and survival. But instead of nurturing that awareness, many around you attempted to reduce it. Not always because they hated you, but because awakened souls force sleeping souls to confront truths they would rather ignore. People often attack what exposes their own compromise. A person content with spiritual numbness becomes uncomfortable not as someone seeking meaning sincerely. Your hunger for truth reminded others of the emptiness they worked hard to avoid. Your sensitivity exposed their hardness. Your desire for purpose confronted their attachment to comfort. And rather than examine themselves honestly, many found it easier to question you instead. This is why chosen individuals frequently grow up misunderstood. Their inner life matures differently from those around them. While others chase acceptance, the chosen soul quietly wrestles with eternity. While crowds pursue noise, the chosen one feels drawn toward meaning. Such difference creates tension because the world prefers conformity over conviction. Yet heaven never asked permission from human opinion before placing purpose upon your life. That is what you must understand now. God's approval does not depend upon the applause of people who cannot perceive spiritually. Noah was mocked before the flood came. David was overlooked before becoming king. Even Christ himself was rejected by those too blind to recognize what stood before them. Human judgment has always been limited because mankind sees appearances while God sees the soul. Still, rejection wounds deep. Why? Because every human heart longs to be understood. There were moments when criticism caused you to question yourself entirely. You wondered whether your convictions were foolish. You considered shrinking your voice to make others comfortable. You nearly abandoned parts of yourself simply to avoid standing apart from the crowd. And this is precisely where many callings die. Not through dramatic failure, but through gradual surrender to the expectations of ordinary minds. A person begins muting their conscience, softening their convictions, hiding their gifts, pretending not to care about what once stirred their spirit deeply. Eventually they become acceptable to everyone around them while remaining strangers to themselves. But something within you resisted complete surrender. Even after disappointment, misunderstanding, and isolation, the truth kept returning. Quietly, persistently, like light pressing beneath a closed door. You could ignore it temporarily, distract yourself briefly. But you could never fully escape the awareness that your life was meant for more than imitation and spiritual sleep. That awareness is dangerous to darkness. The enemy wanted the voices around you to become louder than the voice of God within you. He wanted criticism to outweigh conviction. He wanted fear of rejection to become stronger than hunger for truth. Because once a person abandons their God-given identity, they become far easier to control. They seek approval instead of purpose. They chase acceptance instead of obedience. And slowly they trade eternal calling for temporary comfort. But heaven continued speaking over your life even while others doubted you. God does not consult the crowd before choosing a soul. Divine purpose is not decided by public opinion, social acceptance, or worldly credentials. Often the very people who dismiss you now would not survive the battles you have already endured silently. They see your hesitation but not your warfare. They see your scars but not the strength required to carry them. And the frightening truth is that some people benefited from your insecurity. They felt more comfortable when you doubted yourself. Your uncertainty made them feel superior. Your silence protected them from confronting their own emptiness. But once a chosen person begins awakening fully, old relationships often become strained because truth changes truth, the atmosphere around it. You are beginning to realize that not every voice deserves access to your spirit. Some people speak from wisdom, but others speak from fear, envy, limitation, or spiritual blindness. If you listen carelessly to every opinion surrounding your life, you will eventually lose the ability to recognize the voice of God altogether. And that is exactly what the enemy hoped would happen. One of the cruelest lies the enemy ever whispered into your mind was the belief that your suffering meant God was angry with you. You looked at your wounds, your disappointments, your long seasons of confusion, and quietly concluded that perhaps heaven had turned its face away. The human heart naturally interprets pain as rejection, because pain feels deeply personal. When prayers seem unanswered and burdens continue growing heavier, even sincere souls begin wondering whether they are being punished rather than prepared. But punishment and refinement are not the same thing. Punishment seeks destruction. Refinement seeks transformation. Gold placed into fire may appear ruined to the untrained eye, yet the fire is not destroying the gold. It is revealing it. The heat removes what is impure so that what is valuable may emerge more clearly. And perhaps this explains much about the suffering you have endured. God was never attempting to erase you. He was stripping away everything false that could not survive the calling attached to your life. The painful truth is that many people want purpose without purification. They desire greatness without breaking, wisdom without humility, strength without surrender. But heaven does not build deeply upon unstable foundations. Before God entrusts a soul with greater spiritual weight, He often allows hidden weaknesses to surface painfully into the light. Pride must be confronted. Fear must be exposed. False identities must collapse. Otherwise, the very blessing a person prayed for would eventually destroy them from within. You thought you were falling apart, while God was uncovering what needed healing. There were habits you clung to because they comforted your wounded flesh even while starving your spirit. There were attachments that felt necessary but quietly kept you chained to lesser versions of yourself. There were illusions about who you were that could not survive the truth God intended to reveal. And every time Fee stripped another layer away. It felt unbearable because human beings naturally resist the death of familiar things, even unhealthy ones. Refinement is painful precisely because it is personal. God does not refine masks. He refines the hidden soul beneath them. He reaches into places you carefully protected from exposure, the secret fears, the buried bitterness, the silent insecurities, the wounds you disguised beneath strength. And when those hidden places begin surfacing, the experience can feel terrifying. Many mistake conviction for condemnation because they do not understand the difference between a God who corrects in love and an enemy who accuses in hatred. The enemy says, "You are worthless because you failed." God says, "You were made for more than this." One voice leads toward despair, the other leads toward transformation. Yet transformation demands honesty, and honesty wounds pride before it heals the soul. There were moments when God allowed your own limitations to become visible, so you would stop depending entirely upon yourself. Not to humiliate you, but to humble you. Human pride is subtle. A person may speak about faith outwardly while inwardly trusting on lie their own control, intelligence, or strength. Sometimes God permits weakness precisely so the soul may finally recognize its desperate need for Him. And perhaps that is why your suffering changed you in ways success never could. Pain forced you to think deeply. It shattered superficiality. It revealed how temporary worldly approval truly is. It taught you compassion for broken people because you yourself tasted brokenness intimately. Those who have never suffered often become arrogant in judgment because they mistake comfort for righteousness. But suffering has a way of softening the heart toward others while exposing the illusion of self-sufficiency. Still, there were nights when the process felt unbearable. You questioned why healing seemed so slow. You wondered why certain battles kept returning even after prayer. You feared that perhaps something inside you was permanently damaged beyond restoration. But healing rarely happens as quickly as human impatience desires. God is not merely interested in removing symptoms while leaving deeper wounds untouched. He heals from the roots outward. And roots hidden beneath the surface often require painful excavation before true rest. Oration can begin. This is why some seasons felt strangely lonely. God was removing distractions so you could no longer escape yourself. In silence, hidden wounds become audible. In stillness, buried fears rise into awareness. The distractions that once numbed your pain began losing their power because heaven intended for you to confront what had been silently shaping your life for years. The enemy wanted your suffering to convince you that you were cursed. But curses produce destruction without purpose. Your pain, however painful, has been producing awareness, depth, endurance, and spiritual hunger. Those are not signs of abandonment. They are signs of refinement. You are not who you once were. Certain conversations no longer satisfy you. Certain environments now exhaust your spirit. Certain sins that once felt normal now trouble your conscience deeply. This inner conflict may feel uncomfortable, but discomfort often accompanies growth. A soul awakening to truth can no longer rest peacefully inside illusions that once seemed acceptable. And though the process wounded you, it also preserved you. Because had God allowed you to remain unchanged, you might have gained temporary comfort while losing your eternal purpose entirely. The fire was never sent to destroy your destiny. It was sent to make sure your destiny would not be destroyed by the hidden weaknesses you refused to see before the flames exposed them.